truth was, although we had an 80-seat majority on paper, we didn't actually have a majority in Parliament for some of the challenging things that we really should have done to row back on some of the Blairite reforms and to genuinely change things for the people of Britain. And I think, those divisions became more and more apparent as time went on.
The Times today has some fantastic insight into what is happening inside the Conservative Party. Kemi Badenoch told her shadow cabinet colleagues not to leak their conversation. We learned that in a leak. She also said that her former cabinet colleague Suella Braverman was having a very public nervous breakdown, that Rishi Sunak's decision to call an election bordered on unconstitutional, and described the former MP who bet on the election date as a buffoon. Meanwhile, another member of the new shadow cabinet, James Cleverly, writes in The Times that his colleagues shouldn't indulge in infighting. So where do the Conservatives go now? Let's talk to two former Conservative MPs, to Miriam Cates and Rachel McLean, former deputy chair of the Conservative Party. Good morning to both of you.
Morning.
Morning.
Rachel, do you think that infighting is actually inevitable, and that something, that something has to happen over the next, week or 2 weeks or whatever to get it out of everyone's system?
So look, I first of all want to say that we have just gone through a really bruising period as a party, and it shouldn't just be about us MPs and former MPs who've lost our seats. It should be about every single member of the party and the people who've worked really hard across the country. I know my team in Redditch have given up weeks, years of their lives to support me in the party locally as councillors and performing other vital roles. And we should be thinking about them. We should be thinking about the people out in our communities who've given so much to serve our party. And we should recognise also that we are going through a grieving period. I mean, we're all human, actually, and sometimes that's forgotten. Even though we're politicians, we put ourselves forward in this bizarre job. We are humans, and we suffer from the same weaknesses as any of your listeners do, which means that when you're going through a grieving period of bereavement, you don't necessarily process things, and you're not able to analyse things. We need to have a serious period of reflection. Obviously, infighting is not helpful, and that was one of the things that people punished us for in the election.
Miriam, how long do you think the period of reflection should be?
Oh, I mean, you can't put a time on that. It needs to be as long as it needs to be. Obviously, there'll be a leadership election at some point. And I personally think that should be delayed until we have had this period of reflection and worked out what's gone wrong and what we need to do next to rebuild the party. And I completely agree with everything that Rachel says, but there should be helpful conversations, perhaps difficult conversations behind closed doors. There's no reasons why that can't happen. I think it's so disappointing that some of these conversations have already leaked. It makes it very, very difficult to have those challenging discussions if they're going to leak. Because, of course, everybody, as Rachel said, politicians are the same as anybody else. We need to have those in-depth discussions. If they happen in the public eye, it's very difficult for that to be constructive. So I would just say to the people who leak now and have been leaking for 4.5 years, one of the reasons that we've done so badly at this election is because we have given this appearance of being a leaky ship, of not having things together, of not being competent. And that hasn't always been the fault of ministers or MPs at all. There are always other people in the room who are looking to make a quick headline, and that's very disappointing.
Rachel said that, and she made an obvious point, that, you guys are humans too. It shouldn't really need saying, but it does. Miriam, what have the last 5 days or so been like for you? They must have been very different.
I mean, it is really hard to lose your job in public in the way that so many of us did. And as Rachel said, all of us worked incredibly hard during the campaign. Our volunteers did, delivering. I think we delivered well over 100,000 pieces of literature in my constituency, for example. So there is this feeling of not only have you lost your own job, but of your team now being redundant and having put so much effort in. So that, that really is hard. And then I think yesterday I was actually commentating commentating on another channel of the opening of Parliament and seeing people walking into the chamber, taking their oaths, speaking in the chamber, things that Rachel and I are no longer allowed to do, which is, it is difficult. And being an MP is a tough job. There are bits of it that I won't miss at all, but it is a huge privilege to be based in such an iconic building. People look all the way around the world at our Parliament. It's seen as the mother of all parliaments. So that is a loss. But I do think we have got to think about the wider country here. And it is true that Labour now have this enormous majority, but on a tiny mandate, in fact, a minority of votes. And so it is important the Conservative Party rebuilds quickly, because we have a huge section of society that we need to represent. And yes, we have been punished, perhaps rightly, for not delivering on what we promised, but we very much need to get back into gear, because we are going to need to oppose the Keir Starmer government.
Yes. Rachel, you said that there needs to be a period of reflection, but there also does need to be a new leader of the Conservative Party. During your period of reflection, do you think that are you likely to arrive at a conclusion as to who that person should be? Do you already have in your mind who it should be?
Look, I have my own views, but I'm not going to be discussing them on broadcast, because I, like many others, need to consider. And this is also not about the personalities. And I think we've made some mistakes in the past in our party, and I think in politics generally, about focusing on one person and their personality. And that has sometimes got us into the difficulties that we have got into, because it becomes a drama about personalities and personality types. In fact, what we need to think about is the country as a whole, and what is needed as a programme of government and a set of values and policies that we as a party can all get behind, regardless of the personality. We've got some lessons to learn from Labour, actually. They have successfully got themselves into government with that approach. We need to take some lessons from that, but do that in a Conservative way. I think we have been focused too much on personalities and not on the seriousness of diagnosing the whole system and the failures there. Certainly failures in government, things that we did deliver some very good things, and I will be proud of my record and our record, but some things we were not able to deliver. Why was that? Let's diagnose that, and then let's think about the best way to approach that.
Well, Rachel, some people have said that some people said it's about policy. I think Robert Jenrick said we delivered on Brexit and nothing else. Other people that we've spoken to, especially straight after the defeat, people like Chris Heaton-Harris, I think it was, said it was all about disunity, that there were too many disparate groups within the Conservatives. And I'll talk to Miriam about that in a second. But do you think having 5 families was just too broad a church?
I think it's about all of those things. And if you speak to the millions of voters, you'll probably find a different diagnosis from all of them. Ultimately, look, we failed to deliver on a number of things, and we failed to listen to the public.
But do you think you were too divided? You were not sufficiently united?
Yes, of course. And I think that's right, because we were failing in public on a number of key things, and we were not listening to voters' concerns. Voters wanted us to fix the NHS and potholes, and we were able to allow the drama to take over from those priorities, and that, I'm afraid, is part of some of the reasons why voters did not trust us and did not respect us.
Miriam, you were part of one of these 5 families. Do you think, in retrospect, even though you feel very passionate about certain issues, do you actually think that you took your eye off the bigger issues that people were actually really concerned about, the things that consume them on a daily basis?
Not really, because I think you can only paper over cracks for so long. And the truth is that there is a deep divide within the Conservative Party, the parliamentary party anyway, that actually has been apparent for over 10 years. And that did crystallise around the Rwanda bill, because essentially half of our parliamentary party wanted to adhere to international law. That was more important to them than actually stopping boats coming across. And the other half put the priorities of our own national border security above international law. And I think that kind of epitomised the divide that there was within the Conservative Party. And that was spread to other issues too. And the truth was, although we had an 80-seat majority on paper, we didn't actually have a majority in Parliament for some of the challenging things that we really should have done to row back on some of the Blairite reforms and to genuinely change things for the people of Britain. And I think those divisions became more and more apparent as time went on. Obviously, we had leadership drama and all those things.
Well,
but I think this is the deep divide that we are going to have to find how we're going to resolve over the next few months before we choose a new leader.
Well, on that, very quickly, and speaking generally, have you made up your mind already about who you think the new leader should be, or are you yet to be convinced?
No, and I don't need to, because I'm not in Parliament, so I don't get a vote yet until obviously the members.
No, but you have an interest, don't you?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And like Rachel, I know all the personalities involved. Some of them are my friends, and of course I have a view, but I'm not going to speculate. But I do think the really important thing is, yes, unity is important, but unity comes after a vision and a set of policies that people can get around. Uniting just for the sake of it, so that we don't have headlines, is not enough. That's why at the end of the day, we lost the election, because we didn't deliver the conservatism that people voted for. We didn't have a platform to unite around. So what the platform is has to come before unity. Otherwise, that unity is very, very shallow, and it will result in exactly the same thing again.
Very interesting. Miriam, thank you very much. That's Miriam Cates. We also heard from Rachel McLean.
I don't know the answer to that question, because if it's a really good way of thinking about it. We had James Cartledge on, and I said, did you lose because of Rwanda, or did you lose in spite of Rwanda? And he couldn't really answer it, except to say it felt like he was probably still pro-Rwanda as a policy. And Miriam there saying half the party doesn't agree and half the party does agree. So which is the Conservative Party? Can they be both?
But also this idea that there's no point just having unity if you don't have agreement on policy. You could argue it the other way as well, that you agree on policy first, and then you become united. I mean,
I think that's the only way of doing it. Yeah. You've got to say that being Conservative means X, Y and Z. And everyone who wants to be a Conservative has to agree with those things. This notion, I just wonder, thankfully, has the tired old notion of the broad church actually died a death? Because maybe they need to have 5 or 6 core beliefs that they all 100% believe, and then they can sell it. Keir Starmer didn't say we're going to keep some of the Corbynny feelings. He said we're going to get rid of the Corbynny feelings because we want to be one thing specifically. Can the Tories ever do that? Or do they split into 2 parties?
Yeah, your reactions, just very quickly. Good grief, I'm in tears here. Tell them to stop. Which I presume was that happened during the interview. And some of you saying the clarity the Conservatives are espousing now over the way forward is almost an epiphany in contrast to the chaos. But others of you not impressed. They're continuing to behave like spoilt children, the Conservatives, that is. Anyway, let us know what you think. I mean, I think Rachel McLean struck a different note, but Miriam Cates was very much sticking to, the kind of tone that she has always taken. And that's her right.